Well, welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Today we're going to talk about my favorite old chainsaw here, pretty much. It's the one I use more than anything else. It's the McCulloch ProMax 610. And these are probably the most misunderstood and maligned chainsaw model ever made. Made them for a long time, 1976 through 1999, when McCulloch went out of business. But you know, there's a lot of forums and discussion groups and things like that, and there's two groups that people either love them or hate them. So I'm going to share with you my thoughts and why I use these and why they've been such a great saw for me. I've had a lot of other saws, Huskies, Stills, Home Lights, and other things. The one thing that they all had missing was durability. They all wore out except for some of the old XL12s and things like that, but the more modern saws that I've had just simply wore out. And these never wear out if you give decent maintenance. So the thing with these, what makes them such a great saw, is the engineering. They're very simply made. And if you have a saw that's approximately the same size like a Still or a Husky, they're a lot more complex and use a lot more parts, and even the Home Lights. I'll go over that in a little bit way. But these are just simple, basic, and easy to work on, and so if you maintain them properly, they'll just about last forever. I mean, my main one of these that I've been using since 1980, and I use it every month of the year. I've never had to do any major repairs on them. And I have a bunch of others I just picked up for backups and just for the heck of it too. But anyway, here's some of the reasons that these are such a great saw. Number one is serviceability. Everything's laid out very simply. You know, the air cleaner's right out in the open here. It's easy to get to. The air filter's right here. It's not the greatest system in the world, but it's pretty good, and you have to be careful when you clean these so that you don't blow the fuzz off them, but if you gently clean them and reuse them, they'll last and last and last. But here's some of the main reasons that they're so easy to work on. They're, again, simple engineering. Carburetor is right here out in the open. If you want to take it off, you just take these two screws off and lift it up, take the throttle linkage off and slide it out. The choke just snaps right off too. And so there again, the most common failure of any chainsaw is fuel related, carburetor work. So this is one of the simplest and easiest ones to work on. And the other thing that the McCullochs have that most others don't, and the button here is an overriding oiler, so that it has automatic oiling for the chain, and you can push this button in and it'll also put more oil on the chain than just the oil pump itself. Now most saws, the oil pump is built down inside and it requires dismantling and whatnot. This one is right here and it only has 4 screws to remove it. And that's the only wear point on these saws that I've had where I've had to replace them over the years. Anything else, pretty much other than carburetor rebuild kits and a fuel line and simple things like that, the oil pump's the only thing I've ever had to change. So it takes 5 minutes to take the screws off, and you just slide this, there's a clip in here, you pull this off and slide this back, and you have instant access to the pump here. Now here's the pump, what they look like. And you get 4 screw holes here. That's where the push rod comes in for the overriding oiler. And on other saws, it's a separate function. This is all built into the same one. So there's a piston in here with a spring on it, and when you push it in, there's a check valve, and it'll push the oil through the port and down onto the chain, and when you release it, the check valve goes the other way and it pulls the oil. It's full of oil again. And so there's a diaphragm in here. You can see it right in there. That eventually gets hard and fails. There again, it's just a simple fix. But just as a for instance here, why these are so easy to work on. Here's another real good old saw. This is a Super XL 1972 Home Light of 58 cc's. And it has a manual override pump on it here for the oil too, as well as automatic. But it has to have a special piece in the case for it. It has to have these lines going over here, and there's a check valve, and there's just a bunch of parts to do the same thing, where this is all included in one thing. And so in order to fix these, it takes quite a bit of tear down. But there again, these are still a really good old saw. And poor man's version of it here, like this one, it only has manual oiling only. Now, almost every McCulloch made has an overriding oil pump on it, even the little mini max that I use all the time in the videos. So when you want to service these, everything's right out in the open. 2 screws are here for the side cover to come off. Adjusting screws right here, right out in the open for the chain. Of course, you got your oil fill, your gas cap, and your recoil. You get your throttle and throttle lock and your ignition switch right here. So there again, just simple, easy to work on. Now here is a part saw that I have. This I picked up at a junk sale because somebody put straight gas and blew the power head up. But I've used a lot of parts off it. But there again, you can see the layout of the motor here. It's very simple. Get the cylinder, get the bottom part of the crankcase, and then you have your oil tank, and it all just bolts together as a unit. Very easy and simple to work on. So if you have something like this, it requires probably 3 times as much time to tear down. It's really complex by comparison, hard to work on. They're about the same era saw, made in the same time frame. Now I paid like $5 for this. It's got a good ignition module. There again, I've never had one fail on any McCulloch. And you know, for cleaning the exhaust on these, it's a simple thing. There's 3 bolts on the bottom plate here. It comes off. There's nothing that hooks on the back. The back handle here does not actually physically hook to it. It's loose. It's part of the anti-vibe system. But there's the muffler, just a couple of bolts and it comes right off. This muffler is kind of an unusual piece. Strange looking. But it's actually a semi-tuned exhaust, 2-cycle engines. You know, exhaust system is a thing that can make them perform, and the factory figured out how to do this in a small area. And right here is where the spark arrestor goes, and there's just 2 screws to take it off. It's a little screen, very simple again. So the only thing that I've ever had that was annoying about these is the starter pawls there. If your chain gets really dull, the sawdust will get in here and lock these out, and you have to take them off and clean them, but it's a simple thing. Other saws, it's a lot more work. Now to do any service on this saw, like I say, that comes apart very quickly and easily. And you don't have to spend a week trying to figure out how to take these things apart. No special tools required. So anyway, I'll be back here in a sec. The 610 series, when it came out in 1976, was called a Farm Mac. And that's what they should have left the name at, because the guys in the advertising department wanted it to sound fancier, so they changed the name to Pro Mac. And there's where a lot of the confusion comes in, because if you didn't know anything about chainsaws and you go on and say, oh, that's a Pro model, and gee, it's really cheap. You know, instead of, well, gee, there's a farm saw that's average price. So that's where a lot of people get lost on this stuff. So one of the things that this saw changed in that era, they started using plastics. Now this XL12, you can see everything is metal on it. And it does not have an anti-vibe system. And so if you're doing a lot of cutting in a day, make your hands go numb. So you have to wear something like these. These are called Feller's gloves, and they have a cushion built into them. And they work best in the cold weather because they wick off the water from your hands so your hands don't get cold. But in the hot weather they sweat. And you can't hold a really good tight grip with a glove like this with a fabric in it. Now there again, you got a bare metal bar here, and you got a textured hard plastic covering over this metal pipe, so a lot better grip though. So there again, innovation. And so the things that they did on these saws, I'll show you another McCulloch here. This is one of the predecessors to the 610. The power plant is physically identical. The only difference is the displacement. This one's a 54cc and this is a 60cc. But there again, the basic layout's the same. You got your overriding oil pump, you got your choke right here, you got your ignition switch handy. The only thing that they did on these saws over the years is they changed the starter from different sides as they produced them over the years. And this is what's called a 1010 automatic. They built a real cheapo version that had just manual oiling only, but this has automatic and manual oiling. But the saw that these derived from, and basically all the mid-sized McCullochs came from, was the series 1-10, which came out in the mid-60s, which was 54cc like this. Framework is a little teeny bit different, but there again, the power plant's the same. So we'll go to a more modern one. This is a 1977 Promax 700 70cc. There again, yeah, the overriding oiler, the choke, all the stuff is pretty much the same. And even on these, the starters were changed over. And the other thing they changed was the exhaust system. Some like this one come out the side, and the other ones, the later ones, come out the bottom. But you know, everything on here is metal. And this was the start of the plastic side. So you get a plastic side cover, get a plastic handle, the chain brake handle's plastic, the fuel tank is plastic, air cleaner cover's plastic. And today, of course, even a lot of them, the crankcases are plastic, which is disgusting to me. But anyway, the thing that's interesting on these saws, like I say, that people either love them or hate them. And I usually put one out at the vintage tractor shows just for people, oh yeah, my dad had one of those, blah blah blah. So the thing that's interesting, you always get two different tales. The people that owned them and used them just thought they were the best thing ever. Other people, oh, those are heavy, and oh, they're underpowered, and blah blah blah. And so my question is, well, have you ever owned one or used one? Well, no, my buddy said he had one that blew up because he put straight gas in it because he's stupid. But you know, so I look at it from a standpoint from a homeowner and, you know, homestead. You know, I've gotten over 40 years out of these things with no major repairs of any kind. And you know, they are a little heavier than some of the other saws, but the only reason that, in order to make the price down on them, they didn't use as much magnesium and stuff as like in a Promax 700. And there again, the plastic covers and stuff to cut costs. But anyway, there are just little interesting things about these. The later version of these, the displacement went from 57cc, and then the last one were 54cc, like this Timber Bear here. This is the last year that they made McCulloch. It's 1999. And since the saw was so good, basically the only thing they could cheapen up was just little ancillary parts. And so the thing that these suffered a lot from is recoil starter failures, because they cheapened it up, the materials. The design was simple and lasted forever. And my very first Promax 610, I'd had it for probably about 10 years, and the recoil starter pulley broke on it. And so I went to the local McCulloch dealer, and they had one in stock, and the pulley on it was made out of plastic, and you could see that it actually had a minor flaw in it when it was cast, and so it finally got brittle with old age and broke. But so I went to the local McCulloch dealer when they were still around, bought a brand new starter pulley with a rope and everything for 10 bucks. And so I made the mistake over time of, well, maybe I should get a lighter, more modern saw to replace these old Macs. So I ended up with a Husqvarna 371 with a 32-inch bar, and that was a disaster. There was always something wrong with that saw. The oil pump couldn't keep up with that long bar, so I put a brand new oil pump in it and adjusted it to the max, still couldn't do it. So the bar was always running hot and the chain would get slack, and the carburetor was always something haywire with it. But the recoil starter spring broke in it. So I thought, well, I'll just go to the dealer and get one. And I was used to this, something like this. I bought a spare one for the Max. Never have used it, still got it in the box. The new starter spring was 10 bucks. So my friendly Husky dealer says, oh, well, you only have to buy the whole side cover with a complete starter mechanism. It's only 85 bucks. And I thought, no way, since I'm thrifty or cheap. So anyway, I took it home and I took the spring out and I cut off about 2 inches at the end of it, ground some notches in it so it'd lock into place, and heat treated it and dipped it in oil and put it back together, and it worked until I got rid of it. But like I say, that saw was a disaster. That's one of the reasons I kept all my old McCullochs, is because that thing was such a horrible saw. And then my dad used to use saws a little bit too, and he had a little Husky. I don't remember what model it was, but paid about $300 for it. And one time I quit running on him. He'd had it about 3 years, and I went over and checked it, no spark. And so I saw at the local Husky dealer that had a sign, oh, all our ignition systems are guaranteed for life, because like Still, they'd had a whole bunch of defective ones and they were no good. So anyway, I go in to buy a coil for it and say, yeah, here, I just need this replaced under warranty. And he says, oh, well, all the ignition modules are under warranty except for that particular saw model, and it's only $95, so basically a third of the cost to fix it and put it back in action. And one thing I would say about that saw, it was handy and ran good when it ran, but there again, my dad gave it to me one time, and I'd been out cutting for about 20 minutes, just some light log, small stuff. I just set it down, it was idling away, and it locked up solid. And so I got rid of it. I wasn't going to fix it. They told me how much it cost for the parts, and I about fainted. So that's the other thing with Still parts too. It's just, no, it's crazy. But the McCulloch stuff was always cheap, and you know, like this saw here, it's a early 80s, Still 031. I did a video on this a while back, and why it was out of service is because the springs on the starter pawls were bad. And even though Still sold bunches of these, and the 032 that replaced it and used the same parts aren't available for them. And so I had to get this saw to run again. I had to buy a bunch of used parts. The only thing I was able to buy new was a fuel cap, but it was an aftermarket one, since our new ones were few and far between, and people thought they were worth a lot of money, which they're not. But you know, this saw compared to the McCulloch, this thing is really hard to work on. You know, when I took the muffler off to clean the port and stuff, I mean, it took quite a while. I had to take off the whole top of the saw. McCulloch, you know, 3 screws, and it drops off the bottom, and take the muffler off and clean it. So you know, it's amazing how people talk about German engineering, how great it is. Well, after working on Mercedes-Benz and Audis and BMW, it's BS. Those things are terrible. So anyway, coming back to the old saw here. They say the thing that is so nice on these is the simplicity of design, simple to work on. They haven't been in business since 1999. If I need any parts, which these rarely need, they're easy to find and not very expensive. You know, like a fuel cap, I can find those all there. The starter parts, air filters, clutches. I've only replaced one clutch on one of these. In fact, it was this saw here, but somebody had over tightened it on the crank and it had a crack in it. I'd had the saw about 7 years, and one day it just quit working, so I took it apart and the thing had come in half. Didn't cause it damage or do anything, so my part saw there had a good clutch on it, and I stuck it around there and put it back into service. But you know, the thing that companies do over the years, you know, they make a really good product and they start cheapening it up and things, trying to cut the cost, and then you think you're still getting a great piece of equipment when you're not. But just to show you a quick little thing here, I'll be right back. Well, this is a Montgomery Ward's version of the Promax 610. Same basic saw, but just a few things they did to cut corners on the price. The chain brake arm on this one has a bolt in it that holds it in place. This one doesn't. There's not even a hole for it, so they just, you know, a lousy bolt to cheapen it up. Still got the hole on the arm here, but then the other thing is that, you know, the chain and clutch drive sprocket were really worn on it, so I went to replace those. And the drive sprocket was an oddball size off some old obsolete model, so I ended up having to put a drum and stuff off a later model saw on it and put it back into use. But this saw, I bought it at an estate sale. I knew the people that had owned it. They'd taken quite good care of it. Nobody'd buy it because it said Montgomery Ward's on it. I bought it for $5. Been using it for years. But there again, just going back, you gotta use stuff that you know works. And with me, I like the idea I don't have to spend a whole lot of time working on them all the time. And you know, when I do, it's simple and straightforward, doesn't require any special tools. The other thing I do on these old saws is I keep parts manuals available, so if I do need a part I can look it up, and it's a lot easier to find parts when you have that. And so, like I say, the reasons that these are on the farmstead here, number one is durability, and number two is ease of maintenance and repairs. Those are two really important things, especially if you're not real savvy as a mechanic. And so the drawback to these saws, I guess, is that if you can't work on them or do things like that, most saw shops won't work on them even if they're doing a carburetor repair, because they just don't want to be bothered. But if you're lucky enough to have a actual small engine repair shop, you know, the carburetor kits are readily available. Fuel lines, just straight fuel lines, nothing special. So it doesn't take a whole lot to keep these out on the job. So anyway, there you have it. The most misunderstood and much maligned chainsaw. And for those who think that these are too heavy to use, that just means you're a weenie and you need to toughen up. So anyway, if you're like me and you're not a professional, like I say, these are not professional grade saws, but if you want something that's going to outlast everything else and is easy to work on and do a great job for you, these are the answer. And there's millions of them out there still today, and they're cheap. They made so many of them, they have no collector value whatsoever. And if you look on Craigslist or different places like that, you'll see these in various conditions, but usually pretty clean, because they were homeowner saws. You can buy them for $50 to $125. Now, just for jollies the other day, I decided to look and see what kind of saws were on Craigslist, and the number one was on, they had on sale there, was Stills. And a lot of them were older Stills. And so if you don't know anything, in fact there's an 031 on there just like mine, and they wanted $300 for it, and it was a nice clean looking saw. So if you're a person who doesn't know anything about power equipment, you think, oh, that's a really nice saw, yeah, so I'll go ahead and buy that, it's cheap. And then you take it down to your local Still dealer to get it serviced, and they look at you like, that saw's more than 3 years old. The only thing we have for it is air for the air filter. Get out of here. So anyway, vintage saws like this are the best for me and the best for a lot of people still today. So we'll see you on the next video.